Welcome to the Alger podcast. Following the podcast, there will be a brief disclosure. Hello, I'm Alex Bernstein, and you're listening to the Alger podcast, investing in growth and change. 2024 marked Alger's 60th anniversary as an investment firm. It also marked 30 years at the firm for Alger's CEO and Chief Investment Officer, Dan Chung. As such, we've been doing a special series of interviews with Dan, talking to him about both his personal history at Alger and some of the foundational ideas of the firm that have stood the test of time since the company's inception. Dan, thanks so much for joining me again this afternoon.
Thanks, Alex.
Dan, last time we talked about your early days at Alger. This time I'd like to focus on a couple of the pillars of the firm. That is, the importance of investing in innovation and Alger's deep focus on research. Why do you think hands-on research is so key to Alger's fundamentals?
Well, I think it's because in our investment philosophy, which is now 60 years old, we identified that essentially disruptive change in an industry, in the real world, means that understanding what will happen in the future for an industry or for a company cannot be easily predicted based on past results or on the last 4 quarters of historical financials. And so it requires a mindset and an approach that basically is willing to handle lots of uncertainty and is able to imagine, that it is a creative job, imagine outcomes that are both very good and very bad and not necessarily linear. It's one of the biggest opportunities for investors like Alger is there's a lot of linear thinking in the world. What we try to sometimes do is find the companies whose fundamental performance, which will ultimately be reflected in their financials, is going to be non-linear relative to expectations. And it can go on for years. That capability to discern that, because the world is always changing and because the forces of disruption and innovation are actually accelerating, not decelerating, it seems to me the opportunities for that to add value through investing are as great as they ever were.
Dan, why is having an analyst training program so crucial at Alger?
Well, I think because of the nature of the real world, which is where innovation is accelerating, disruption therefore is accelerating, and potentially disruption is larger in scale when it happens as well. In our modern world, we're seeing time accelerated and size of disruption greater. And that's not just on a technological basis, that's on a societal basis, that's on a geopolitical basis. It's happening across many countries, not just the US. So analysts at Alger are charged with being sector experts, knowing their industry as well as an expert in the industry would. So knowing the companies, the people, the technologies, the consumers, the trends. And, when you combine that with the pace of disruption and the scale of disruption that's happening, I think it's only experienced analysts and experienced portfolio managers who can try to discern what are going to be the winners in terms of companies. What are going to be the trends that dominate? What are going to be the trends that fail or end?
What does it take to be an Alger analyst?
Well, I like to see people who high degree of curiosity. They want to learn new things all the time in a diligent fashion, in a fashion that is the details matter. And we don't want them totally detail-oriented and missing the forest for the trees, if you will. But learners, people with the ability to go deep and detailed. We have a very diverse background of analysts and portfolio managers here. I think the leaders here are very good at looking for people who have what I would call determination. Some would say it's grit. It's the evidence of some kind of challenge overcome. And sometimes those challenges just may be meeting the high expectations of their parents. But rather than breaking them, it's definitely made them better,
Dan, how often do analysts surprise you? That is, can you remember times when an analyst uncovered something that might not have been evident through traditional analysis?
So our healthcare team has deep scientific and industry knowledge. And some of the success they've had in biotech companies in figuring out which ones have the scientific platform that will result in good clinical studies has been quite amazing. They read a lot of scientific journals. They talk to the doctors. They understand, most importantly, what's important and what's not important in a scientific result that might indicate, success commercially or failure commercially. Because again, these are very early stage, so many of them still can fail, but they've done a very good job identifying where the science is interesting, where the approach or process could be attractive or even foundational for a new field. I would say in tech, we have another very deep, long history there. And some of the insights in the semiconductor industry that we've had over the many years have been quite amazing. I mean, the big picture ones often are things like that the capital intensity of the industry would take a step function up after a long period where it trendlined and then took a step function up. Most of the time, most people will trendline something, but we had insights because of the deep knowledge of the semiconductor industry and the research simply that our analysts did, that semiconductor capital intensity would step up across the industry. And that happened years ago. More recently, we're focusing a lot of that on AI. And obviously leaders like NVIDIA, Microsoft, but also what will be the other winners in this. And again, it requires a pretty deep understanding of the barriers to entry as well as where are the openings for people. Because AI will definitely upset the apple cart in some industries, but it will also probably, for some companies, allow them to extend their leadership or to catapult them into a new generation of leaders.
Dan, what do you think is the biggest advantage to being an analyst?
For someone who likes to learn and be engaged with the real world, there are not many better jobs than being an analyst. We tie that, the learning and research and engagement, with another very important thing, which is the ability to see your insights and ideas go into action, i.e. in a portfolio. And if you generate superior returns, it's a tangible, measurable, quantifiable thing. You get to participate in and meet some of the most important people in business, the innovators, the disruptors. You pretty much have a front row seat. I mean, as an analyst or a portfolio manager, you have a front row seat at hundreds of companies and their paths.
Thanks, Dan. I wanted to switch over and talk somewhat broadly about something you already touched on, Alger's history and philosophy of investing in innovation. In your experience, what would you say are the three biggest innovative or disruptive trends you've seen over your 30-year career here?
Well, I mean, the internet itself, although interestingly, if the internet hadn't come along with mobile data, I'm not sure how disruptive it really would be. So imagine internet, but no mobile data. That means okay, you're shopping on Amazon, but you got to do it at your desktop. And it's okay, this is pretty interesting, but it's not that different than catalog shopping. It's more efficient. It's a little bit more, interesting. Streaming movies, okay, well, it's cheaper, better, but the fact is we had cable TV and there's lots of entertainment. So my point is internet, very important, but actually mobile data, the ability to carry it with you and do it that was actually kind of almost more the game changer for the internet, right? That's why we all carry around smartphones now as opposed to just a phone. So those are two of the big ones coming together, and they really did kind of come together. I think genomics, sequencing of DNA, the rapidly falling costs there, and then, of course, leveraging all that data with advanced science, computing, so it's big data. I mean, all of that to the purpose of better identifying what's the cause of a disease, what are the potential therapies and cures for it. That's how we're getting the COVID vaccines, mRNA. That's a technology that's born from understanding the sequencing of genes and how cells produce proteins, i.e. transcription of RNA sequencing. A lot of the newest therapies that people are targeting for autoimmune cancer diseases are basically using the body's own autoimmune system to supercharge it, right? Or give it the right inputs to defend itself. But those inputs are all the knowledge of the proteins, the markers, the antigens, all that. That's all basically based on genomics and computing being brought into biology. And some cancers now are basically being cured, or at least remission periods of decades, right? Which is almost like a cure versus, say, just 30-something years ago. So healthcare has made a lot of advances driven by, I would say, genomics.
And what's the third biggest innovation, in your opinion?
The third biggest, I don't think it's a technology so much. It's just a change in society, which it's globalization. If it's a technology, I guess it's the falling cost of travel, because it's kind of shocking to me how much more interconnected we are, how much more people travel, how much better, even in the slightest way through tourism, but nevertheless better, people understand other cultures, other people, other societies. I mean, that globalization is real, and it's pretty shockingly dramatic. I mean, I come from a family that we went to Hawaii once, and we weren't poor, but we weren't wealthy, but we went to Hawaii once from California, I should say. So it's not that far, but it was there were families I know that went every Christmas. We were not one of them. We could not afford that. We went once. But today, when you look at the travel statistics, either here in the US or globally, you really see an amazing amount of travel of all kinds, both domestic and international, and also very different forms. People are traveling not just to hotels, but Airbnb. And a lot of Airbnb stays are with a host. And then, of course, there's adventure travel, whether it's on a bike or sailing or hiking or whether it's a food exploration of some country, right? Experience-based travel of both sort of the outdoorsy kind and the cultural kind. So that's really kind of amazing to me. And I think by and large, we actually do understand people from other cultures and other countries, I think a lot better than we did when I was a kid. You know, the experience of your typical, 20-year-old now versus me at 20 of travel is really dramatically changed. And so that sense of the world of globalization is, I think, radically different. It was very, very expensive to travel when I was a kid. People don't actually appreciate how much cheaper it is today to do these things.
Dan, how difficult do you think it is to effectively capitalize on innovation or disruption before the street does?
That is a very good question. I mean, it's always been very challenging. It would be a little too simple to say, oh, it's harder now because news travels faster and you got, computers and all that. But I'm not so sure about that. But it's always difficult to stay ahead of the crowd. The pace of innovation is higher and faster today. For investors, the problem is there's a lot of innovation that doesn't last very long and then burns out versus innovation that creates something that lasts for years and years and creates an industry. So distinguishing between the two is a little tricky. Probably the biggest issue today in the economy and in the stock markets is that you've got the dominance of mega cap companies who are pretty fast moving to capitalize on changes. And so small cap companies, the small pure innovator of some new technology or a game or entertainment, their stuff gets copied so quickly, hard for them to become large companies and dominant companies for over a period of years because they're so quickly facing competition from larger companies.
Dan, last question. Do you think Alger's philosophy of investing in innovation and disruption will still be going strong in 50 to 60 years?
I absolutely think so. I mean, we're in our 60th year because the philosophy works so well. And it works so well because it's a philosophy of how to look at the real world and how to invest in the opportunities that, the real world is bringing. So dynamic change is going to occur. You can pretend it's not. That's not a very useful survival technique for most species in the real world. Or you can look at it and say, okay, where is the dynamic change occurring? And how do we take advantage of that as investors? And I think actually the pace of innovation increasing, the globalization of the world is actually making, in some sense, the opportunities for growth investors like Alger are even greater than they have been in the past. Because again, the opportunities are not just here in the US, they are also definitely in Asia, they're definitely in Europe as well. And most importantly, they're in companies that can be global leaders. We're faced with a lot of challenges in the world today: climate change, reshoring, geopolitics, artificial intelligence, aging populations. So yeah, look, there's a lot of revolutions occurring across a lot of industries. And the trend generally is to benefit all of us. Some more than others is true, but I see that as a fruitful field for investing the way Alger has for 60 years.
Dan, thank you so much for talking with me this afternoon.
Thanks, Alex.
And thank you for listening. For more of our latest insights and for more information on how Alger can help you unlock your growth potential, please visit alger.com. The views expressed are the views of Fred Alger Management, LLC, FM, and its affiliates as of December 2024. These views are subject to change at any time and may not represent the views of all portfolio management teams. These views should not be interpreted as a guarantee of the future performance of the markets, any security, or any funds managed by FAM. These views are not meant to provide investment advice and should not be considered a recommendation to purchase or sell securities. Risk disclosures. Investing in the stock market involves risks, including the potential loss of principal. Growth stocks may be more volatile than other stocks as their prices tend to be higher in relation to their company's earnings and may be more sensitive to market, political, and economic developments. Local, regional, or global events, such as environmental or natural disasters, war, terrorism, pandemics, outbreaks of infectious diseases, and similar public health threats, recessions, or other events could have a significant impact on investments. Investing in innovation is not without risk, and there is no guarantee that investments in research and development will result in a company gaining market share, achieving enhanced revenue. Companies exploring new technologies may face regulatory, political, or legal challenges that may adversely impact their competitive positioning and financial prospects. Also, developing technologies to displace older technologies or create new markets may not in fact do so, and there may be sector-specific risks as well. As is the case with any industry, there will be winners and losers that emerge, and investors therefore need to conduct a significant amount of due diligence on individual companies to assess these risks and opportunities. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. Companies involved in or exposed to AI-related businesses may have limited product lines, markets, financial resources, or personnel as they face intense competition and potentially rapid product obsolescence, and may depend significantly on retaining and growing their consumer base. These companies may be substantially exposed to the market and business risks of other industries or sectors, and may be adversely affected by negative developments impacting those companies, industries, or sectors, as well as by loss or impairment of intellectual property rights or misappropriation of their technology. Companies that utilize AI could face reputational harm, competitive harm, and legal liability and/or adverse effect on business operations as content analyses or recommendations that AI applications produce may be deficient, inaccurate, biased, misleading, or incomplete, may lead to errors, and may be used in negligent or criminal ways. AI companies, especially smaller companies, tend to be more volatile than companies that do not rely heavily on technology. Investing in innovation is not without risk, and there's no guarantee that investments in research and development will result in the company gaining market share or achieving enhanced revenue. Companies exploring new technologies may face regulatory, political, or legal challenges that may adversely impact their competitive positioning and financial prospects. Developing technologies to displace older technologies or create new markets may not in fact do so, and there may be sector-specific risks. There will be winners and losers that emerge, and investors need to conduct a significant amount of due diligence on individual companies to assess these risks and opportunities. Important information for U.S. investors. This material must be accompanied by the most recent fund fact sheets if used in connection with the sale of mutual funds and ETF shares. Fred Alger Company LLC serves as distributor of the Alger mutual funds. Important information for UK and EU investors. This material is directed at investment professionals and qualified investors as defined by MIFID FCA regulations. It is for information purposes and has been prepared and is made available for the benefit of investors. This material does not constitute an offer or solicitation to any person in any jurisdiction in which it is not authorized or permitted, or to anyone who would be an unlawful recipient, and it is only intended for use by original recipients and addressees. The original recipient is solely responsible for any actions in further distributing this material and should be satisfied in doing so that there is no breach of local legislation or regulation. Certain products may be subject to restrictions with regard to certain persons or in certain countries under national regulations applicable to such persons or countries. Alger Management Limited, Company House 8634056, domiciled at 78 Brook Street, London, W1K 5EF UK, is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority for the distribution of regulated financial products and services. FAM, Weatherby Capital LLC and/or Redwood Investments LLC, U.S. registered investment advisors, serve as sub-portfolio managers to financial products distributed by Alger Management Limited. Alger Group Holdings LLC, parent company of FAM and Alger Management Limited, FAM and Fred Alger and Company LLC are not authorized persons for the purposes of the Financial Services and Markets Act 2000 of the United Kingdom, FSMA, and this material has not been approved by an authorized person for the purposes of Section 21(2)(b) of the FSMA. Important information for investors in Israel. Fred Alger Management LLC is neither licensed nor insured under the Israeli Regulation and Investment Advice of Investment Marketing and of Portfolio Management Law 1995, the Investment Advice Law. This document is for information purposes only and should not be construed as an offering of investment advisory, investment marketing, or portfolio management services as defined in the Investment Advice Law. Services regulated under the Investment Advice Law are only available to investors that fall within the first schedule Investment Advice Law qualified clients. It is hereby noted that with respect to qualified clients, Fred Alger Management LLC is not obliged to comply with the following requirements of the Investment Advice Law. 1. Ensuring the compatibility of service to the needs of client. 2. Engaging in a written agreement with the client, the content of which is as described in Section 13 of the Investment Advice Law. 3. Providing the client with appropriate disclosure regarding all matters that are material to a proposed transaction or the advice given. 4. A prohibition of preferring certain securities or other financial assets. 5. Providing a disclosure about extraordinary risks entailed in a transaction and obtaining the client's approval of such transactions if applicable. 6. A prohibition on making portfolio management fees conditional upon profits or number of transactions. 7. Maintaining records of advisory discretionary actions. This document is directed at and intended for qualified clients only. Alger pays compensation to third-party marketers to sell various strategies to prospective investors. The following represents the noted percentages of firm-wide assets under management as of November 30th, 2024. NVIDIA Corp. 8.9%. Microsoft Corp. 8.54%. Amazon.com Inc. 5.83%. Airbnb Inc., negative 0.03%. Fred Alger and Company, LLC, 100 Pearl Street, New York, New York, 10004, 800-305-8547, alger.com.